The fire is already lit. Sit down, breathe, and listen. A fox walks through the forest when she sees clusters of ripe grapes hanging high above. She jumps once, twice, 3 times. She can't reach them. Then she walks away with disdain and murmurs, "They're sour anyway. I didn't want them." Carl Jung knew this fable, and he knew it revealed something much darker than a simple rationalization. Jung saw there the birth of a dangerous archetype, the eternal, critical observer. You know this person. You probably live with them. Maybe you work with them. You might have even been born their child. It's the one who became an expert at analyzing why your dreams won't work out, who knows exactly why that relationship is dangerous, why that career is risky, why that change is irresponsible. Jung would call this projected psychic compensation. When someone can't have something, their mind doesn't just give up. It creates a crusade to convince others they shouldn't want it either. In this video, you'll discover how to identify when you're being sabotaged by foxes disguised as advisors, and how your grapes might be being poisoned by people who never had the courage to taste their own. But first, are you sure the advice you follow comes from real wisdom, or is it just sour grapes from those who gave up before you?
That night by the fire, Jung seemed to be ruminating about something, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames, as if seeking answers in the dancing fire. "You know," he said, without taking his eyes off the fire, "the fox fable isn't about grapes. It's about the exact moment when someone is born to sabotage others' dreams and calls it protection. The fox didn't lie when she said the grapes were sour. In that instant, they really became sour to her. Her psyche performed an alchemical transformation. It converted desire into repulsion, failure into superiority, attempt into naivety. But Jung noticed something more sinister. The fox didn't keep this wisdom to herself. She became its missionary. Every time another fox approached the grapes, there she was. "Don't try. I already tried. I know it's not worth it. Trust me." Jung understood this wasn't conscious malice. It was an expanded psychic survival mechanism. The human mind can't bear the dissonance of having given up while others still try. So it does something more sophisticated. It evangelizes its own surrender. And in that moment, Jung whispered, the false protector is born, the one who protects others from the failure he himself didn't have the courage to face. We all know this person, the one who always has a reason why you shouldn't try what they never dared to do. This is the archetype of the protective saboteur, someone who transformed their own cowardice into a mission to save others from the same mistake they avoided making.
Jung leaned forward, as if about to reveal a secret map. Each fox has its own way of convincing you the grapes are sour. Learn to recognize the different types before it's too late. Throughout decades studying the human psyche, Jung identified 4 main archetypes of well-intentioned saboteurs. The anxious protector, usually a maternal or close female figure. Her favorite phrase is, "What if something happens?" She transformed her own anxiety into a protection mission. Every dream of yours is a potential nightmare for her. Strategy? Bombard you with catastrophic scenarios until you give up for your own safety. The bitter realist, typically an older man who has seen life, says phrases like, "Life isn't a fairy tale," and "You need to wake up to reality." He transformed his own disillusions into universal wisdom. Strategy? Use his own failure as proof that you will also fail. The perpetual victim, always has a story about how they tried something similar and it went wrong. I've been through this. I know how it ends. She needs you to also fail so she doesn't feel alone in her surrender. Strategy: use her own wounds as evidence that the world is too cruel for attempts. The theoretical expert, the one who has read about everything but tried nothing, has statistics, knows failure cases, quotes studies. Did you know 90% of businesses fail? Strategy: bury your dreams under an avalanche of discouraging data. Jung realized that each type uses a different mask, but the unconscious goal is the same: keep you at the same level of limitation where they find themselves. But here's what few realize, Jung said, poking the embers. Each type of fox wasn't born that way. They were shaped by their own unhealed wounds. Jung realized that each saboteur archetype has a specific psychological origin. The anxious protector usually lived through or witnessed some traumatic loss. She may have lost someone dear who took too many risks, or grew up in an environment where security was constantly threatened. Her anxiety isn't paranoia, it's a hyperactive alarm system developed to avoid future losses. The bitter realist was often a dreamer who was brutally disappointed. He tried something big, failed humiliatingly, and transformed that pain into cynical wisdom. Now, he projects his disillusion as protection. Better I disappoint you now than life destroy you later. The perpetual victim learned that pain is her only source of attention and connection. Unconsciously, she needs others to also suffer so she doesn't feel alone in her suffering. It's not malice, it's a desperate attempt to create bonds through shared wounds. The theoretical expert developed knowledge as a shield against vulnerability. He learned that knowing is safer than trying. His expertise is armor against the humiliation of failure, but also against the possibility of success. Jung observed something devastating. Each fox is trying to save you from the pain she couldn't process in herself. They don't sabotage out of malice, they sabotage out of wounded love.
But there's something even more sinister, Jung said, his tone becoming more serious. The human brain is programmed to absorb others' fears as if they were universal truths. Jung, even in his time, intuited something that modern neuroscience would prove decades later. Our brain has mirror neurons that make us literally feel the emotions of people close to us. When your mother feels genuine anxiety talking about your plans, your brain registers that anxiety as if it were a real danger signal. When your father shows genuine discomfort with your ambition, your mirror neurons translate this as, "This must be really dangerous." It's as if, Jung explained, our brain can't distinguish between fear based on real experience and fear based on others' unresolved trauma. Neuroscience discovered that emotional contagion is stronger between people with deep emotional bonds. That's why it's particularly difficult to resist the fears of close family members. Our brain is neurologically programmed to treat them as survival signals. When someone you genuinely love shows terror regarding your dreams, your sympathetic nervous system automatically activates. You're not just disagreeing with an opinion, you're fighting against a neurological survival response. Jung realized that many people give up on their dreams not from lack of courage, but because their brains were hijacked by the unprocessed fears of those around them. The most devastating thing, Jung continued, watching the flames flicker, is that this process happens completely below the level of consciousness. Modern neuroscience has identified that we absorb not only the direct emotions of people close to us, but also their limiting beliefs about the world. It's what scientists call transmission of cognitive schemas. When your family repeatedly demonstrates that the world is dangerous, people aren't trustworthy, dreaming big is irresponsible,
Your brain begins to organize reality through these lenses, not as conscious choices, but as internalized neurological truths. Jung observed that many patients carried fears that weren't even theirs. A woman had terror of traveling alone, not because something bad had happened to her, but because she absorbed her mother's anxiety, who in turn had absorbed her grandmother's, who lived through a war. It's like an emotional infection that passes from generation to generation, Jung murmured. Each family transmits not only genes, but patterns of fear. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking, has difficulty questioning beliefs that were absorbed through deep emotional bonds. That's why it's so hard to rationalize against family fears. They're engraved in more primitive layers of the brain. Jung realized that many people spend their entire lives fighting against limitations they didn't even choose. They just absorb them through emotional contagion with people they loved.
And it was then, Jung said, with a long pause looking at the fire, that I understood something frightening about human nature. The people around you who most discourage your dreams aren't trying to protect you from failures. They're trying to protect themselves from having to face their own surrenders. When you try something they never dared, you become a cruel mirror of their own limitations. Your courage exposes their cowardice. Your attempt questions all the reasons they invented for not trying. So, they do something devastatingly human. They transform sabotage into love. Jung discovered there's a psychological mechanism by which people convert their own fear into altruistic concern. The mother who never took romantic risks isn't protecting her daughter from men. She's protecting herself from having to admit she was afraid to live. This is the most subtle addiction that exists, Jung whispered. The addiction to keeping others small so you don't feel small. Family pseudo-wisdom offers something that real wisdom can't guarantee: collective validation of mediocrity. If everyone in the family agrees that dreaming is dangerous, no one has to carry alone the weight of having given up. It's a perfect system of mutual self-protection, and that's why it's so destructive. Entire families can spend generations avoiding great lives out of fear of small failures. Jung realized something that few therapists of his era understood. There's a perverse comfort in being surrounded by people who also gave up. When your entire social circle shares the same fears, those fears begin to seem like universal wisdom. If all your friends think entrepreneurship is madness, that true love is fantasy, that changes are dangerous, well, it must be true, right? It's easier to accept a collective limitation than to face an individual possibility, Jung observed. The fox didn't just convince herself the grapes were sour. She created an entire community of foxes who never tasted grapes, but all agree they must be sour. And now they mutually validate each other in their wisdom. Jung called this conspiratio mediocritas, an unconscious conspiracy to keep everyone at the same level of limitation. It's not deliberate malice, it's collective psychic self-preservation. Think about your social circles. How many people around you really encourage you to try big things? How many share your fears, and how many share your ambitions? If you're surrounded by people who always find reasons for you not to try, Jung would say you're not in a group of wise people.
You're in a group of foxes convincing each other that all grapes are sour.
But what most impressed me about this patient, Jung continued, was that he had become incapable of feeling real desire. It wasn't just that he didn't try, he genuinely didn't want anything anymore. This is the final stage of psychic compensation, when protection becomes total anesthesia. The fox isn't just protected from future disappointments, she's protected from future hopes. Jung called this death of spontaneity. When we become perpetual analysts of our own desires, we lose the ability to simply want something without immediately understanding why it's a bad idea to want it. The fox developed such excessive lucidity that she can see problems in any desire before even feeling it completely. It's like having a hyperactive emotional immune system. It protects against everything, including good things. Have you been doing this? Analyzing your own desires until they die? Understanding so much about why something might go wrong that you lost the ability to simply want it to go right? Jung identified there's a point where wisdom becomes paralysis, when we know so much about risks that we forget why it's worth taking any of them. The fox didn't just give up the grapes, she gave up the ability to feel hungry. The most tragic thing, Jung said, stirring the fire with a stick, was that he had forgotten what it felt like to feel pure desire. Desire without analysis, without fear, without strategy, just wanting. Pseudo-wisdom doesn't just protect us from failure, it robs us of the experience of naive hope, irrational enthusiasm, the desire to try something simply because it seems good. The fox lost more than the grapes. She lost the ability to see grapes and feel like eating them without immediately activating her entire critical system to explain why it's better not to try. Jung observed that our protection mechanisms, when hypertrophied, become our jailers. The fox created a system so efficient at avoiding disappointments that it also avoided any possibility of spontaneous joy. And there's something even more subtle. She lost the ability to genuinely admire those who still have courage. When she sees other foxes trying, she can no longer feel either envy or admiration. She feels only melancholic superiority, as if she were the only adult in a playground of naive children. Her constant criticism atrophied not only her courage, but also her ability to get excited about others' courage. She became immune not only to her own failure, but also to others' success. Jung realized this was the true hell of pseudo-wisdom. It's not the absence of achievements, it's the absence of the ability to rejoice in any achievement.
That night, Jung asked a question that echoed in the forest silence. How do you distinguish real wisdom from fear dressed as knowledge? The difference, he said, lies in the origin. Real wisdom is born from experience, from error, attempt, lived failure, and extracted learning. Pseudo-wisdom is born from analyzing others' failures and extrapolating our own fears. The fox who tasted 100 types of grapes and learned to identify the bad ones has wisdom, Jung explained. The fox who tried to reach grapes once, failed, and now explains why all grapes are problematic, that one has only disguised fear. Real wisdom makes us braver because it teaches us to fail better. Pseudo-wisdom makes us more fearful because it teaches us to avoid better. Jung identified some signs of pseudo-wisdom. It always has absolute certainties about things it never tried. It feels superior to people who still take risks. It finds problems in any opportunity before even investigating it. It takes more pride in having avoided failures than in having achieved successes. True wisdom, Jung whispered, makes us humble before life's mystery. Pseudo-wisdom makes us feel like owners of truths others haven't discovered yet. The fox with real wisdom would say, "Those grapes are high, but maybe I can find a creative way to reach them." The fox with pseudo-wisdom says, "High grapes are always sour. Trust me." But there is hope, Jung said, and for the first time that night, he smiled. Pseudo-wisdom can be unlearned. Courage can be recovered. The fox can feel hungry again. The first step, he explained, is recognizing our own inner fox, identifying in which areas of life we became critical experts instead of courageous practitioners. In which areas have you become more analyst than participant? Where have you developed sophisticated theories about why something doesn't work, but avoid testing those theories in practice? Jung proposed a devastating exercise. Ask yourself, what do you give most advice about and take least action on? That's your area of pseudo-wisdom. The second step is accepting the humiliation of ignorance. The fox needs to admit that actually she doesn't know if the grapes are sour. She just created a theory to protect her ego from having to try again. Courage, Jung said, isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to be a beginner again, to not know, to try even when our expertise tells us not to try. The fox needs to descend from her position as expert and become a student of life again. She needs to trade the security of her theories for the vulnerability of real experience. And maybe discover that some grapes are indeed sour, but others might be sweeter than she ever allowed herself to imagine. Jung knew the fable of the grapes and the fox wasn't just a story about individual frustration. It was a map of the modern human condition, our tendency to transform each failure into philosophy, each fear into wisdom, each surrender into spiritual evolution. He saw this in his patients, in his era, in himself. The human capacity to create sophisticated belief systems that justify our own paralysis, to become experts in the life we don't have the courage to live. Dostoevsky wrote, "Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a vast consciousness and a deep heart." Jung would add, "But pseudo-wisdom is always avoidable for an honest consciousness and a courageous heart." The fox represents all of us when we choose the dignity of analysis instead of the vulnerability of attempt. When we prefer to be right about why something won't work rather than discover if it might work. Jung realized that each generation creates its own sour grapes. For his contemporaries, they were social conventions. For us, they might be authentic relationships, ambitious dreams, emotional vulnerability. But the mechanism is always the same. We transform our inability or fear to reach something into moral or intellectual superiority over those who still try. And so, generation after generation, we perpetuate the fox archetype, experts at judging the game we don't have the courage to play. That night, Jung looked at the fire one last time and said something that kept echoing long after he had fallen silent. The fox never knew if the grapes were really sour. She just decided it was safer to believe they were. And perhaps that's the most brutal of truths, that we spend an entire lifetime creating sophisticated theories about why we shouldn't try, when the only way to know if something is worthwhile is by trying. The fire crackled one last time, as if agreeing with the silence that followed. Jung stood up, shook the ash from his hands, and before disappearing among the trees, murmured, "You can keep being an expert on sour grapes, or you can start feeling hungry again. The choice, as always, is yours."
See you soon.